Hello, welcome to American Baker in Germany. I'm Michelle, and today we are making a back-to-school cake. In Germany, children who start school get a long, thin cone shaped like out of paper, and it's filled with all sorts of school supplies and treats and things that kids love. And it's for the first graders who are starting school. It's a really big deal around here, so we are making one of those as a cake. So this is for a little girl of a friend of mine who's starting school this year, and her mother asked me to make her a cake. So let's get started.
I start out the day before with some preparation work. My friend asked me to make some pencils on the cake. To make the pencils, I roll out a log of one color fondant, cutting it to about pencil length. Then I roll a small piece of flesh-colored fondant into a cone and cut the bottom flat and cut the tip off. Then I attach it to the gray fondant with edible glue. Then I roll a tiny piece of gray and attach it to the tip with edible glue. And the first pencil is finished. I started with gray, then pink, then black, then brown, then yellow, then orange, then red. The sun went behind a cloud while working on the blue, so I turned on a lamp to make the green. And finally purple. Then I set them aside to dry for a day. Now we're at cake. This is lemon cake made from Ritz-Carlton lemon pound cake recipe, which is super light and fluffy and really delicious. The buttercream is my American buttercream recipe, substituting lemon juice for the milk. Then for good measure, I added some extra citric acid to the cake and the buttercream. I had baked my cake in two 6-inch square cakes. I cut them from one corner to the middle of the opposite side to form the triangle shapes. I cut the edges that meet on the first layer to make sure the two pieces meet each other flat. Then I cut the second layer the same as the first, but I only used the larger piece on top of the first because I'm planning on carving this into a real cone. So I used the leftover pieces to cut into pieces to fill in the top where the cone would be gathered into a slightly dome-shaped. I stick all the pieces together with buttercream. I compare the depth of my cake to the cake box, and it needs to lose a bit of height. Then I begin carving this with a long bread knife. First, I created the slope of the cone down to the tip. Then, using my bread knife and a steak knife, I slowly round the edges and cut it into the shape of a cone lying on a table. This time it looked like it might actually fit in the cake box. I clean the crumbs off the cake board and crumb coat my cake with lemon buttercream. When frosting an odd-shaped cake, it's a good idea to use a smaller spatula than usual to get all the little details. Now, my friend's daughter wanted the cone to be blue. I didn't have very much blue fondant, so while my cake was chilling in the fridge for 30 minutes, I used about 500 grams of white fondant and mixed it with the 100 grams of blue fondant that I already had. I thought I would need some blue food coloring, but I actually thought the mixed fondant was beautiful and decided not to bake it darker. Once the buttercream had set up, I frosted it again with my lemon buttercream. taking the time to get the frosting as smooth as I could. Then I cleaned up my cake board with a wet rag and put the cake in the fridge to set up again. Once my buttercream had set up, I used a paper towel to press on the buttercream to get most of the ridges out. It sort of worked. Then I rolled out my blue fondant and covered the cake with it. I smooth the fondant with my hands and trim off the excess with a sharp knife. I trimmed the fondant just a touch short this time because I forgot to take into account that the cake curves under the edges. I used my knife to tuck in the edges as best I could. Then I rolled out some yellow and red fondant and cut out the letters A, B, and C and the numbers 1, 2, and 3. I chose yellow and red because when I think of back to school, I think of primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Blue is already all over the cake, so that left yellow and red for me to decorate with. I stick them on opposite sides of the cone with edible glue. As I was looking at it, it bothered me that you couldn't tell where the cone ended and the dome top began. I decided it needed some definition. I used my clay extruder and some of the blue fondant to make some ropes out of blue fondant. And braided them together. Then I stuck it on the edge of the cone with edible glue. Then I used my colored pencils to hide any last imperfections along the bottom and decorate the cake board. Then I used my tapered tool to add some gathered texture on my dome on top of the cone to make it look like fabric that had been gathered together. Then I rolled out a piece of my blue, cut out a circle of it, textured it like ruffles with my tapered tool, gathered it into a bunch, and stuck it on the middle of the dome with edible glue, as if it were the spot where the fabric were gathered. And our back-to-school Schultüte cake is finished. I think this cake turned out really lovely and really represents the phenomenon of the Schultüte in Germany. My friend was really happy with it and was excited to celebrate the first day of school with her first grader.
Little girl that we know who is starting school this year.
Shaking his pineapples.
Okay.